Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Mercola, and I'm here today with Dr. Shiv Chopra, who is coming to us from Canada. Dr. Chopra was with us last year when we were discussing the swine flu vaccine. He was definitely an expert because he has some really interesting training. His formal training is as a veterinarian in India, and he actually came to Canada in 1960, literally 50 years ago. And shortly after Canada, he was moved to England. He worked for a drug company there, where he's head of biological research. And then he went back to Canada and he worked for 35 years with the Canadian government in what is now called Health Canada. And Health Canada, for those of you not familiar with it, is the equivalent of the FDA in the United States. And his first 25 years there, he worked for the drug approval system for human vaccines. And then he was moved over to human safety evaluation for drugs which are given to food producing animals. And it's his experience in that division of Health Canada that we're going to be talking with him today. We're going to focus on some very important food safety issues because it's the number one issue across the world. American Canadian foods are some of the most toxic foods on the planet, and this is due to the continued use of hormones, antibiotics, rendered slaughter waste, GMOs, pesticides, many of these things we've talked about before, and these foreign introductions can cause disease and death. And we've discussed this previously in the past, and it's a significant issue. And these are some of the primary reasons why you want to choose organic foods. Now, unlike the United States, the European Union countries, most of them do not permit these materials in food production. As they rightfully should, because their primary purpose is to protect the public health. So the issue has been lingering with the WTO for nearly 2 decades, and other food-producing countries like China, India, Brazil, Mexico are also getting into the fray. So some of these countries are actually refusing to import Canadian and American beef and GMO crops. So it's a little bit unclear to me, Dr. Chopra. Welcome, first of all. But for the items I just discussed with respect to introducing all these relatively toxic elements into our food supply, that is clearly true for America. Is it also true for the Canadian system?
Thank you very much. One small correction. I worked for about 18 years in vaccines and antibiotics for humans, and then the other half of the 35 years, I worked for the human safety evaluation of drugs which are given to food-producing animals. It was in the Bureau of Veterinary Drugs of Health Canada. This is where, as soon as I got in there, the first product that landed on my desk was recombinant bovine growth hormone in 1988. And I was concerned. I raised some questions because it was a growth hormone and was given to cows and totally unnecessarily, only to produce with the claim to increase milk production in cows, so they'll become cheaper and make more profit for farmers and so forth. Produced by Monsanto and a competing company, Eli Lilly, and both of them came to Canada and they wanted approval for it. And the questions I raised were very simple. There's normal scientific questions. If you're going to give something to food-producing animals, then under the laws of both the countries, the company must demonstrate that it will produce no harm ultimately to people who consume that product. And they said, no, they don't want to test it, and there's no need to test it because it's the same hormone, although it's genetically engineered, same hormone that the cow produces. I said, it doesn't matter. Even if it's naturally produced hormone obtained from the cows, if you give excess of it, just like if you take too much insulin for yourself, you can die. If you take too much thyroxine, you can die. And so things like that. So I said, you must test it in laboratory animals as required under the law. And they did not want to test it. They did not test it. And the US FDA passed it anyway. And so the pressure went on and on and on until I blew the whistle in 1997. In the sense, I didn't blow the whistle. I just simply said, we need to test it. And the pressure the pressure from my bosses all the way going up to the top and out into the political circles of the government bureaucracy under the prime minister. They were saying, just pass it because the US has passed it. So I wouldn't pass it. So some of my colleagues and I took the matter up in court. We filed grievances, and the matter became public. And I had written a report on it. It was called the Gaps Analysis, and it was actually ordered by the department that I should write that report, and they formed a committee of 4 scientists. And we produced that report, Gaps Analysis report, and we showed that the certain data that I had asked for back in 1988 had actually been produced by Monsanto. It was sitting under our noses, locked up. Nobody would let us see it. And it was also received by, at the USFDA. And all the questions that I had asked were then came out to be positive, exactly my concerns.
Let me
In
just
other words,
interject.
it increased.
Can I just interject something here just for clarification? So it was 1988, and that was Monsanto that you were challenged with, and they were the producer of the bovine growth hormone at that time. Is that correct?
They produced the bovine growth hormone, and also another competing company, Eli Lilly. Their subsidiary was called Elanco. They also had it. Now the U.S.
Well, I
has a
just wanted a point
law
of
for.
clarification because I think just to get the time frame historical perspective correct, this is the same Monsanto that is responsible for producing nearly all of the GMO crops in the world. But at 1988 hadn't yet produced any because I believe they weren't introduced until the mid 90s. Is that correct?
Yes, while Eli Lilly had produced human insulin back in the early 80s, that's when the competition for GMOs began, because that was a human product. So
Okay.
that was, and they had monopoly. Eli Lilly had a monopoly. And when the idea came up that they wanted to produce this bovine growth hormone the same way from E. coli bacteria by genetic modification of the bacteria, and Monsanto got the US government to agree that in the United States, patent will be given only to one company per product, and that was it. And Monsanto got that patent for RBGH, the recombinant bovine growth hormone, and Eli Lilly felt shortchanged, so the case was filed in U.S. federal court, and Monsanto won. And well, actually, they made an out-of-court settlement that in the U.S. only Monsanto will sell the RBGH, but elsewhere in the country they will share the markets. And it was for that reason that Eli Lilly Elanco came to Canada. They wanted to test it, and the product that I looked at belonged to Eli Lilly. But it didn't matter. The same questions applied to both. And I asked those tests to be done in rats. And at that time, I assumed they had not been done. And then now from 88, we are in 1997. I insisted that those tests be provided. I had written a letter to Elanco. I said, what happened to my letter? You're pressuring me to pass it, just sign off. And I want to know what happened to my letter. And that's how I forced the department to let me look at all the data. And a committee was set up, and we went into the files, and then we discovered, lo and behold, the results had been gathered by Monsanto, and all my fears turned out to be positive. In other words, exactly the questions I had raised, the data that needed to be gathered had been gathered by Monsanto, and the report was sitting under our noses, and it showed that it increased insulin-like growth factor in rats. It increased thyroid activity. It produced effect in the testes. And I had also asked them to do a test in female rats, which they didn't, because I was concerned about the ovary and the progesterone and so on. And all those hormones are measurable. Anyway, the matter then exploded in Canada, and I was hauled before the Senate Committee on Agriculture with my colleagues, and we had to testify under oath. And what happened? This is the beginning of my trouble and exposure of Health Canada and exposure of the U.S. What the U.S. did, how it happened. In any case, eventually,
for most of our listeners don't understand the trouble you went through, so the one you just referenced. So you are not currently working for Health Canada. Now, were you fired from Health Canada, or did you voluntarily leave eventually? And what year was that?
no, in in 2004, two of my colleagues and I were fired by Health Canada on charges of insubordination. We're still in court for wrongful dismissal. 6 years later, we're still expecting the decision on whether we were insubordinate or not. Insubordination means that you refuse to work. We didn't refuse to work, but we refused to pass drugs which we thought should not be passed. And so courts will have to decide whether we were insubordinate or not. So that's
Well,
beside the point.
that's an interesting commentary on the entire system, and maybe equally as important as to the facts that we're discussing, in that the entire system that is designed to protect the public health really doesn't work anymore. Because when you have concerned scientists who really understand the issues and voice these concerns, at least in Health Canada, they're fired. They're dismissed because they interfere with the collusion between government and these large multinational corporations whose primary intent and purpose is to increase their bottom line profits and not to serve the public health.
This is very interesting. It's pertinent. Actually, a year ago, I published a book describing all the things that we're talking about in Canada, US, and the world, and what can be done to solve the problem. And my book, as you know, is called Corrupt to the Core: Memoirs of a Health Canada Whistleblower. It tells the whole story of science through my life, how I grew up in India, how I went into science, how I became a veterinarian, and it was going to be the most wonderful job ever for anybody. And it was, until I studied and graduated and worked outside. And now I thought I got the most wonderful job working for the government, which will do. I now was receiving the latest information on any technology, on any product, because it was my job as a regulator to receive before the data gets published. But then at the same time, the pressure from the companies on the politicians, and the politicians through the higher levels of bureaucracy down to the scientist level, that you pass it. Because if we pass it, that's the only safety they have. Because if the scientist says pass it, then the politicians and the higher bureaucrats are off the hook. They say, well, the scientists approved it under the law.
So that is their workaround. They do not have to prove it in peer-reviewed scientific literature. That, to the heck with that. All they have to do is to manipulate the regulatory authorities in the specific country, and they can use that as proof and documentation rather than the science that their product is safe. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because the law in the United States and Canada, and presumably in other countries, simply say the companies that want to sell any product for humans or animals, which will be consumed for food by people, must do research, must produce their own data, and bring to the government for verification. And verification in Canada is only paper verification. We don't do any testing. The US FDA does get involved in the actual testing, clinical testing, and so on. US is a large country. They had the resources to do it, and their laws required that to be done. But not in Canada. We received the same data. We were supposed to receive the same data that the US FDA received, and only a paper exercise based on that will say we want more data, or we approve it, or we don't approve it, or if we don't approve it, we put some precautions, warnings, and so on. But the pressure was not to do any of those things, not to require data, don't put any precautions, don't raise any questions, just pass it. Because now the bosses are receiving these orders by policy only, not by law, from higher up in the political circles. In Canada, our system, unlike because we are a parliamentary democracy, so we have the highest level of government called the Privy Council. Privy Council is composed of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the clerk of the Privy Council, who is secretary to the Prime Minister and to the Cabinet, and head of the entire bureaucracy. This is the way Canadian system works. Now, the pressure
Well,
was
point of
coming.
just a point. Yeah, where's that's the question. Where is this pressure coming from? How did the manipulation come down through the chain to cause you to force you into that situation where you were either fired and stuck to your guns and told the truth, or comply with to what the requests were?
Well, the way the pressure works is that the politicians, at every election time, the companies, the drug companies, pharmaceutical companies, slaughterhouses, all these mega companies get together, and they bring pressure on the politicians because they make political donations and so forth, and they put a wager on every political party, and that's how they and there are lobbyists, registered lobbyists, and then they even get jobs inside the cabinets, like Michael Taylor at the USFDA, and there were people like that in our in Canada as well, working in the Minister of Health's office, and pressuring that where is this product, where is that product, and so it's that kind of pressure, uh, incestuous relationship between corporations and the government, and the public just assumes because government is looking after them, public just just assumes everything is all right. If an individual scientist like me blows the whistle, and then of course everybody gangs up, and then they say he's not a team player, he's a troublemaker, and get rid of him. And I have letters all documented in my book, how the companies wrote to the Minister of Health, how they went to the Privy Council, how they went to the Prime Minister, fire Shiv Chopra and fire whoever stands with him. And that's how three of us were fired. So that is the kind of pressure that the companies have. You know, it's an interesting thing that we talk about pressure. It's not a new phenomenon. This began as a competition after Second World War between the communist world and the capitalist world to produce more food. After all, it was food, or lack of enough food, and nutritious food that always starts the war. And it did start those First World War, Second World War, and at the end of the Second World War, technology now was going to rule the roost. And therefore the competition between the communist bloc and the capitalist bloc was now going to take control of all food producing systems everywhere. And what happened? The communist world fell apart much before the capitalist world, and too much food was produced. Currently, there's too much food everywhere, and especially in the capitalist world. Europe, the European Union, NAFTA countries, and now into the fray are getting in South America, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, so-called BRIC countries, and all of them are producing too much food, and they're all producing toxic food everywhere. The American and Canadian food now has become the most toxic on earth, and
Yeah.
thousands of people die.
Yeah, let me point that out because when you
And
hear about
then
this in the news, that's what, where people die from these infections. It's not because that the food itself is necessarily toxic. It's because it's an artifact, a side effect of the entire food production system that's giving these antibiotics, is causing these antibiotic resistant strains, producing these fatal infections in tens of thousands of individuals, dying needlessly because of the system.
yep, and it's not, you know, there is in the food supply now. I mean, these bugs are not even only coming through animals. It's also coming on vegetables, on salads, because those are grown in factory farm under filthy conditions, and then they come pre-washed and in plastic boxes, and people don't even, and they call it farm to fork safety. And people bring these plastic boxes to the table. They don't even wash. It's pre-cut salads, spinach, tomatoes, you name it, broccoli, whatever. And it comes pre-cut, pre-washed, and people bring it to the table. People have become so lazy, so dependent on companies. They think everything is safe because it's government approved. And then there are hundreds of thousands of pounds of beef recalls, chicken burger recalls, and then now salad recalls. How can you get salmonella on chilies, jalapenos? I mean, those bugs shouldn't be surviving, but that's what's happening. And then you got listeria, and people in Canada a year or so ago, 22 people died from listeria infection from eating the meat, the processed meats. And then the company comes out, Maple Leaf, and apologizes that, oh, we are good corporate citizens. And people are feeling sorry for the company. And then they're saying, well, we won't be able to prevent it forever. So therefore, Health Canada should set a standard of how many listeria can you swallow without getting sick. This is the kind of regulation, manipulation that is going on in the United States, in Canada, and the rest of the. This is how the food is so toxic. Now, antibiotics, you raised the point, are given for two reasons, or at least so it is claimed, but ultimately it's the same reason. One is for growth promotion. They're saying healthy bacteria living in the gut of the animals steal some food. And if we put them on tetracyclines and other antibiotics for life, then that food will be used by the animal to grow bigger and fatter and faster. And so therefore, that's one. It's called non-therapeutic use. It's only a technical difference. Then there is therapeutic use. And therapeutic use, the companies say, and the governments accept, is to prevent disease. You can't, disease which is not there, what are you trying to prevent? It's like doing surgery, dirty surgery, and keep people under antibiotic control, under antibiotic cover. And so these are other problems. So ultimately, it comes to the same thing. Then there are hormones. Hormones are given as, once again, for growth stimulation. At one time, they were giving it to all food producing animals, and then it was banned for chicken. And one hormone, diethylstilbestrol, or DES, was banned in 1973. And then they turned around and approved another one. And then more, and in the same time, within the same year, virtually. And then in the 80s, they even approved implantable hormones, which are injected and left in the behind the ears of beef cattle for life. And these hormones cause cancer, and they're demonstrated to cause cancer. And then
Oh,
and they're
point of
saying, well,
clarification. Did they cause cancer in the animals receiving them or in the humans consuming the animal food or both?
no, animals don't live long enough to get cancer. Animals are slaughtered and eaten, but in their meats there are leftover hormones. Some of them are synthetic hormones, and they have been proven to be complete carcinogens. In other words, they can initiate a new cancer, or they can promote an existing cancer. They'll do both. And therefore, they're called complete carcinogens. And they are in the food supply. If something is a carcinogen, you cannot determine the safe limit for such a product, because a single molecule of such a product can attach to a single cell in the body. And if it's done on a daily basis for life, it can trigger and promote cancer. So therefore, it takes a long time to develop. And the governments are saying, well, there's no proof that it causes cancer. How are you going to get proof? Unless there are lifetime studies. And lifetime studies in animals have not been done, and they're not allowed to be done. And the governments are not asking for them. That's one thing where hormones are used for extra weight in beef. Hormones are also used in factory farming operations for convenience of bringing all animals in heat on the same day so that they can impregnate them by artificial insemination. So you give hormones to animals, and those are called, once again, they call them therapeutic uses. They call this part as though the animal is sick. The animal is not sick. It comes in heat when it needs to, when it wants to, when nature permits it. No, they induce estrus or heat, and so they can impregnate them, all of them, all at once on the same day by artificial insemination. This is no therapeutic use. So it's like the humans using the HRT and then discovering many years later that those hormones cause breast cancer and uterine cancer and so on. And it's the same thing in animals. And then when the animals are slaughtered, the ears are cut off and the hormones are implanted behind the ears. Ears are cut off and they are all ground up, and you turn that into soft candy and gelatin, and that comes into yogurt and your ice cream and so on. So concentration of hormones are getting indirectly into the food system and confectionery and whatnot. So there we have that. A third item, when animals are slaughtered.
Let me just mention here too, and emphasize as I did earlier, that this is, the more you're sharing, the more obvious it becomes of the absolute importance of selecting organic food, as much organic food as possible, because for the most part, and I'm sure there's some exceptions because of the perversion of the system, but these organic foods are going to be free of these ingredients, and you're going to get back to a wholesome food supply. It's more expensive, but in the long run, it clearly is worth it, because not only would allow us as consumers to vote with our pocketbooks and induce these organizations to produce food that's free of these chemicals and antibiotics and hormones, but it will also work for our best long-term safety.
I will, in fact, quite elaborately speak about it in a few minutes, and then the way I'm talking, there will be no cost increase, and all food will automatically become organic. There will be no other way. I will speak about that when we start talking about what can people do, what are the solutions to this problem. But let's go back for a moment to a third item. We've talked about hormones. We've talked about antibiotics. A third item is the rendered slaughterhouse waste. Due to factory farm operations for just growth, crops and animals, now we also have humongous slaughterhouses. The ordinary butchers are gone. In the beginning, there used to be butcher shops, and then when large grocery stores were made, there used to be a section in each of them. There used to be local butchers. You picked up the local meat, and if you wanted special cuts, they would come to you. They say, well, we'll cut it and make it the way you want it, and we'll wrap it to you and give it here. Or you want to buy bulk, we'll give you more. If you want just chicken breast, we'll give you chicken breast. If you want a certain cut of beef, they'll give you that. Pork chops, they'll give you that. Now you go to grocery stores, none of that exists. There is no such thing. It's all pre-packaged, coming from packing plants, and it's sitting there. Take it or leave it. That's all you get. And there are no more small butcheries, there are no small slaughterhouses left. So these humongous slaughterhouses where animals are brought, and millions of animals. I just have a report with me published a few days ago in Canada in the national newspaper, Globe and Mail, that millions of animals arrived at the slaughterhouse already dead in transport. They've been in the trucks for as long as 60 hours or longer and transported unheated vehicles. And they're bruised and they're damaged. They're starved. Animals are also starved in their own place. There's a complaint filed. 4,000 pigs starved. And all these animals are picked up and they go into food production. They're not wasted. Once in a while, somebody gets fined $3,000 or $4,000, but the food keeps coming into the system and people are consuming it. The only advice they receive, cook it thoroughly, but otherwise don't worry about it. In there is also the 50% of the wasted, what they call waste of the animal, which is not meat. All that is picked up, and the blood, the bones, the skin, the feces, whatever is on the slaughterhouse floor, ears and cartilages and the nervous system, everything is picked up. And also animals found dead on the road, which is called roadkill. And also mink from mink factories. All these animals are picked up and put into the same system. They're all ground up. All this stuff is ground up, boiled and dried and turned into powder and fed back to food producing animals, dairy, beef, chickens, pigs, all of them, and fish. And fish meal also fed back to, so it's all recycled. This also started in about the same time period in the 60s and 70s, and it got picked up big time in the UK. Then, in a few years, they discovered there were many cows, dairy cows, that developed what's called bovine spongiform disease or mad cow disease. What happened was that these animals got sick in the brain and they would stagger and fall down and die. But they got processed as beef and fed to people. And then it was discovered that people who ate beef, some people got what's called CJD and died. About 150 people died, and everybody who died was under the age of 40. Because the incubation period of this disease, bovine spongiform disease, in cows is 6 to 8 years. In humans, it may be as much as 25 years. So it could only be discovered in dairy cows because they're kept for a longer time, 8 or 9 years. And when they were fed back, and then hundreds of thousands of cows in Britain came down with mad cow disease. What happened? Why it's called spongiform disease is because every species naturally, once in a while, just like cancer, develops a disease in the brain which turns the brain into like a sponge, holes in it. And the animal or individual, it occurs in people as well. It occurs in cats, it occurs in sheep, it occurs in cows, horses, dogs, all species. If they live long enough, a certain small percentage will get this kind of disease. It's a wasting disease of the nervous system, and that individual animal or person dies. But if you start recycling it and feed it to those same animals or people, then it begins to multiply. It comes from a protein which are called prions. I call them primordial proteins before there was any life on the earth. They were only proteins as life was beginning to emerge. Proteins were being formed, they were becoming longer and longer chains, but they had memory, just like every atom has memory. Every molecule has its own memory. And those protein molecules have memory to this day. And just like cancer, if they don't cooperate with the rest of the body, then the system can break down. But if you start picking up cancer and start injecting into people, transferring it to other animals and people, you can cause cancer. Similarly, you can transmit this disease from prions. But if you keep doing it, it becomes like a centrifuge and it becomes concentrated and the disease will multiply. This is what happened with the BSE. For many years, Britain was in denial. The politicians were going up on television saying, look, I'm eating hamburger and I'm eating steak. Nothing is happening to me. Of course, nothing is going to happen to you if you're an old man or old woman, because it'll take 10 to 20 to 25 years to develop. So you'll probably die of something else before you get mad. But the young people, if you're feeding that stuff to babies out of little beef pastes and pork pastes and as baby formulas, baby food, then there's likelihood that that's what will happen. And that is what did happen. It took many years. First, the European Union banned the import of British beef. Then they discovered they also had it. France, Germany, even Denmark, Italy, even Japan, Israel, they all started to discover wherever slaughterhouse waste was fed, they discovered it. The first disease incident occurred in Canada in 1993. Then they, oh, that was only bull. And it was a bull that should be even a greater risk because you're importing semen now. You have to be careful when you do these kinds of things. But then they kept importing into Canada slaughterhouse waste from Britain to as late as 2000. And then we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and now more than 18 cases of BSE. And they continue to erupt. US got it too, 1 or 2 cases. They said, oh, no, that was a Canadian cow. No, it came from there. It's not ours. But nobody's testing it, either in Canada or in the United States. They test a few cows, and then they made a decision. They made a decision for exports from Canada. They will only import into the US cows or meat of cows which are under the age of 30 months. Because over the age of 30 months, there's a greater risk of that meat or cow. So therefore, disease doesn't develop in one day. If the cow was not sick at 30 months, but the disease was still developing, and 1% of the nervous tissue is in the muscle, because in Canada, they said, let's remove the brain and the spinal cord, which they call specific risk material, or SRM. Now you can eat the rest of the cow. Well, there are 2 issues here. 1% of the nervous tissue, nerves are in the muscles. And you can't scrape off every bit of the nervous, even the central nervous system, as you're slaughtering and processing these animals. And so there is some of that is here. You cannot take the slightest bit of risk. Secondly, it's only they put some ban, limited ban with this SRM ban. It's only for ruminants to be fed back to ruminants, but chicken waste can be fed to cows. Cows can be fed to chickens and to the pigs, and the pigs and chickens to cows, and fish, and back and forth. So it's all being recycled. And then let's see what has happened. As a result of this, we now have trading blocs. NAFTA is on one side, the North American Free Trade Agreement, in which the United States, Canada, and Mexico are a group. Then there's the European Union bloc. Then there's the Asian bloc. Then there's Brazil standing on its own. And then there are the South American countries and Cuba, the only country which grows so far only organic food, but not for long. It may only last as long as Castro does. And so now, therefore, I've come to conclude that the food produced in the United States and Canada is the most dangerous anywhere on earth. But because now US is the only superpower left, or perceived to be the superpower, at least it can still throw its weight around on the rest of the countries, and countries like China, India, the same type of corrupt politicians and systems. They're saying, we want to bring prosperity. India, ink is shining, China is growing, and Brazil is progressing, and Russia is coming on board, and South Africa will come along. This is the system that we are falling into. There's too much food in the world. Companies, the corporations are saying they want to feed the hungry world. That's a complete lie. The hungry world is now feeding, has been feeding the developed world for a long, long time. China, India, Mexico, Brazil, they're all food exporting nations. People in India are still starving, a lot of them, and commit suicide, but that's not because of lack of food. There's no shortage of food. That's because of corruption. Because the farmers who produce food are not allowed to have food. They are the ones, and the corporations, and then Monsanto, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, BASF, Dow, all these companies are now descending in India. Even the universities want to open branches in India because Indians speak English and it's a highly educated country. And so therefore they're saying, we cannot sustain our prosperity in America, so let's go to India and China. Do it to them and retain our prosperity. And what's the source of prosperity? Intellectual property rights. What are intellectual property rights? They're no products. It's only cockamamie ideas of Monsanto and Bayer and Pfizer and all these kinds of companies trying to say we're going to produce genetically modified organisms, which means both plants and animals. And that's what people will eat all over the world. And that way we'll produce more, not only more food, but more nutritious food. We will produce rice which has protein in it, for God's sake. Why do you need protein in rice? Why can't you eat beans or meat or drink milk, which is the way nature intended it? They are going to put more vitamin A in golden rice, genetically modified. Why can't you eat carrots? They're going to increase vitamin D. Why can't you go in the sun? Vitamin B12. Why can't you eat green vegetables, leafy vegetables, clean? Why can't you grow your own? And so I'd like to, before I come to the solutions, I want to give you a critical piece of information to the audience. The European Union got wiser because, first of all, their experience with mad cow disease, and even before that, hormones and antibiotics, led mainly by one small little country, Denmark, 4 million people. They did the testing. They did the testing on hormones. They found hormones, some of them are complete carcinogens. And they found antibiotic resistance is coming from the animals. So they said to the European Union Parliament, whether you people want to stop it or not, we are banning both these products. And we all have already banned the use of slaughterhouse waste. No animal products are to be fed back to any food producing animals in Europe. That's the European law. And induced by Denmark, then other Scandinavian countries, Sweden and others joined up with them. And so they banned the use of hormones, beef hormones, and both now therapeutic and non-therapeutic. In other words, you cannot even use hormones for synchronization of estrus and in food-producing animals. And so in the European Union, all these products are banned. So there are trade barriers between NAFTA and the European Union. The matter has been lingering in the World Trade Organization for the last 2 decades. The WHO, the FAO, and its Codex Alimentarius, they're all now part of that corruption. They set up these peer bodies to say, we will set standards, not only for hormones and antibiotics, and but also for melamine, for bisphenol. I mean, these are the new entrants because those foods now cannot be produced. It's not just factory farming. It's these factory operations for transport of food in canned foods, bottles, coming manufactured in China, India, wherever they're going to, because no factory, whether it's food production or processing, can be sustained in the very expensive American and European countries. In the G8 countries, labor is too expensive. They cannot do that. So the same companies that did all this harm, horrible harm, in the rich countries have moved into, and they're rapidly moving into, China, India, Brazil, and everywhere. So now people are going to have to eat, they already are, but much more, food that will be grown and manufactured, toxic food in India, China, Africa, Brazil, Mexico, wherever. And it'll all be imported all over the world under the control of the corporations. The fight between Europe and North America is, it cannot be sustained because companies have already moved out of here. Drug companies, chemical companies, slaughterhouses, they've all moved. And they also, and we've talked about it before, they also create these scares, some true, some made up. Bird flu, swine flu, all this nonsense that goes on. It has implications for humans and food production. And these are all made up stories. And then food is becoming more and more toxic. And they give you solutions. The solutions that the governments are giving are ignore the existing law, Food and Drugs Act. We're not going to ban any of the things that the European Union has banned, but we will set standards for them. And those standards will become worldwide. And so you will have no choice whether you live in Europe or America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And I've traveled to all these places in the last 2 years. And India and so on. So food must be of the same standard, which means the most toxic everywhere, most dangerous everywhere. So there should be no discrimination of any kind, whether you're rich or poor. We'll all be eating the same toxic food everywhere on earth, produced by factory farms, large slaughterhouses, and food processors, and fishers on trawlers, which are actually trawlers, fish processing factories in deep seas. So all that stuff is coming back to us that, in fact, nature does not permit. Nature does not permit GMOs. Nature, what are GMOs? Genetically modified organisms or genetically manipulated organisms, seeds, animals. Genetically modified organisms, the way they are producing, is not permitted in nature. Humans, due to their ingenuity over thousands of years, figured out that they can select certain seeds and animals, they can breed them together to make them more efficient. Cow to give more milk, grass to give wheat, rice, and so forth. All this 8 to 14, 15,000 years ago, these discoveries were made, but people remained with nature. They did not temper. If they did temper through selective breeding or even hybridization, for example, they figured out you can cross a donkey and a horse and get a mule because the mule looks like both the parents and is hardier than both, and it has genitalia, but it's sterile. It cannot produce another mule. So therefore, you cannot cross widely divergent species. If you do, it dies by itself. Nature does not let it reproduce. Now, for genetic modification, the kind we're talking about, and the companies like to say, oh, it's been going on for thousands of years. This is a lie. Sure, you can make poodles, you can make racehorses by selective breeding, and you can make mules, but you cannot cross a human gene and E. coli bacteria and make bovine growth hormone and inject it back into the cows. It may be all right to do that if you want to make human insulin because you have a disease and you were giving pig insulin or calf insulin. Now you can give this insulin made by bacteria. That may be acceptable. But you cannot do that to produce milk. And you cannot do that to produce actual animals, genetically modified animals, fish. The US has already approved genetically modified fish. And now they're on to making goats and cows to make genetically modified products from them, sera, globulins, antibodies to give to people. And when that is done, they want you to be able to eat those animals for meat. And this is unconscionable. This is not permitted under natural law. And with this, the companies and their captive politicians are saying they're going to bring prosperity and urbanization. But what have we done so far? When I first came to Canada 50 years ago, 25% of Canadian population used to be in family farming. Now, it's less than 1.5%. I don't think the US is much different or Europe is much different. The average age of a Canadian farmer is over 60 years. So I reckon within the next 5 to 7 years, there will be no family farms left in Canada. The same will, maybe to a lesser extent, become true in the United States because the way things are going. All you're getting is imported labor from Mexico and Caribbean for picking, hand picking fruits and vegetables to bring, and that brings other problems of immigration and so on, and reaction among people and joblessness and so forth. We're creating huge problem. In India, which when I left India, 90% of its population was in agriculture. Now it's come down to 60%, between 60 and 70%. What has it produced? 30% Indian people have become very wealthy and also sick in health. Rich in pocket, poor in body. That's what is happening there and India and China and other countries. Wherever the food system is copied, what are we getting? Cancer, obesity, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, reproductive disorders, immune disorders, attention deficit in children, diabetes type 2, all kinds of diseases which used to be rare. Now there are pandemics. 40% of Indian population is diabetic, and they're predicting it might become 80%. Is that prosperity? It has also created in all the countries, including America, and it's doing so, is urban poverty everywhere. Urban poverty and now joblessness. And this is at the point of violence. And it's not, I'm not kidding. I hope I'm wrong. I think we are at the point of President Obama, either 2 years or 6 years, this is the end of the line. It is the end of the line. If there's end of the line for food, it's the end of the line for a nation. And that is what America, Canada, Europe, and quickly followed by the rapidly developing countries doing the same thing. The whole world is on a rapid course of collapse. Having given all this negative, because it's a horrible story, there are people reacting on both sides. Corporations, of course, have to say what they're saying because they have to make money with or without lies. But their captive governments are also telling lies. So instead of implementing existing law, Food and Drugs Act, they're saying we're going to create new laws, all under the guise of food safety. They come under various numbers, and in the US, for example, S510 or N or National Animal Identification System or enhanced food safety. All these numbers are all coming from President Obama under his administration as now. This is to improve the broken system. The system is not broken by itself. The governments are responsible for breaking it, for not implementing the existing law. And so instead of doing that, they're not backing down on factory farming. They're not backing down on these large slaughterhouses. They're not backing down on globalization of food production. They're not backing down on putting all these toxic materials into the food system, but they want to create new laws so that we can trace worldwide the source of trouble. And then we'll do something. Meanwhile, people will not grow poultry outdoor. People will not touch food. People will not grow food. You cannot hold, you cannot grow, you cannot store, you cannot transport, you cannot do any of those things to food unless it's done by government sanction. And if you do, you can be arrested, you can be searched without warrant, you can be fined, you can be jailed. And if you criticize food safety without your own scientific evidence, you can be jailed. Where are we living? I thought we came away to a hopeful place, away from fascism, away from communism, a true democracy in the world. America is the leading light. But if America is succumbing to corruption and death of its people, then the rest of the world has no hope because they are copying America the Great. America the Great that used to be the Great since the days of the Boston Tea Party, decolonization. And now America has become the virtual colonialist of the whole world in a very bad way without moving any forces, without going anywhere, through what's called intellectual property right, owned by Monsanto and the whole gang of thugs. Because they're saying we're not selling any product. We won't even be, we'll actually give you GMO seeds. But you have to buy this idea, we license you. And every year you have to buy the same product from us and pay us royalties. These are the true parasites. That's how a parasite lives. It doesn't do any work. It steals. It camouflages. It takes things from everybody else, makes everybody else work. That's a parasite. That's what these companies are. That's what these governments are. They're all parasites. The politicians have become parasites. They keep on increasing their own salaries and people losing jobs, and now they don't have food. And that, I think, is about to happen within the next 3 to 4 years, maybe sooner. Because if you have this many million people unemployed and that there's no hope, then there's going to be starvation on our doorsteps. After all this doom and gloom, I'd like to bring some hope because I think there's hope. I've just given you the corporate side of companies and governments. There's also the NGOs and the public, the ordinary people who are also lobbying very hard, but with the wrong method. They're only complaining to the fox that so many of my hens are gone and the fox is not listening. This is the fox of corruption, the parasite. You cannot be complaining to those people. So therefore, this is a wrong approach. They've been doing this for all these years. These NGOs and intellectuals, professors and universities, all the honest people in desperation, they're saying this shouldn't happen, that should. I was in India when this great controversy on BT eggplant took place. Fortunately, at that time, a moratorium was placed, but now the same minister, and now they're saying there should be a parliamentary committee and there should be a committee of experts who will decide. Who the hell are these experts? Who are these experts to tell people whether they'll be harmed or not? Why can't people decide themselves what they want to eat? It's their divine right, it's their constitutional right, wherever in a democracy, to eat and feed to their families that nature makes, or what they can make themselves, grow themselves with the help of nature. Here is what I think should happen. 2 things, 3 things. 1, people everywhere in the world, and it's described in the last chapter of my book, must demand that we want to eat and feed to our families that nature makes. Therefore, we are asking our governments to ban 5 substances from food production. Those are, and I call them the 5 pillars of food safety: hormones, antibiotics, rendered slaughterhouse waste, genetically modified organisms, and the pesticides that go with them. If you ban these 5 substances, and 3 of which are already banned in Europe, and the other 2 are not yet decided, and they're beginning to ban many pesticides. GMO decision is still being looked at in Europe and India and China and so on. Ban these 5 substances automatically and under existing law. You go and prove that they're safe. Otherwise, we're not going to let you use those under the existing law. If you don't ban them, we will take legal action against our own government, take it all the way to the Supreme Courts and say, implement. US FDA, we're suing you. President Obama, we're suing you, your administration. Implement existing law, the Food and Drugs Act, and it's attached to the criminal code. If you don't, there'll be criminal charges laid against whoever is stopping that by policy. If you're going to go by policy, then make the companies responsible into the future to pay for the damage they will do into the future, which we cannot determine right now. Just like President Obama is doing to BP right now, extracting $20 billion. The same thing should be done for, if you're going to take risk with people's lives and livelihood, then those companies must be made to pay if it's into the future. But the better solution is to ban them now.
I have a point of clarification. So the suggestion is to have the government ban these things, and the practical question becomes, how does one get them to that position? Is it through petition? Or is it through only the legal system where you're filing a lawsuit to force them to do that?
No, actually, it's very simple because the US law permits. You just simply petition the US FDA because they have the authority under federal law to implement the Food and Drugs Act and its regulations. And you say, you petition, here are the 5 substances which have not been proven to be safe under the Food and Drugs Act, implement those. The US FDA has already taken a position because some people are beginning to take some action.
So if it's that simple to implement a petition, how come it hasn't been done? And I guess my question is that we know how influential these multinational corporations can be. Wouldn't they exert an influence to counteract that petition?
Well, it needs to be tested. It's actually being tested in the US. And the FDA's deposition is that the public does not have the right to its own health and safety. US FDA determines it. People do not have the right to eat what they want. This is the US, this is in court, it's before a federal court. But if that happens, and I'm saying have a genetic petition to the US FDA, let them take a position in court. It'll be inexpensive. All you're doing is serving a notice petition. And then you go to court and ask the federal court to order the US FDA to implement law because it's their authority under federal law. If they don't, then they should be prosecuted. And this matter will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And that, again, it's not a very expensive proposition. Once the public goes in, and if the public is litigating, all you need to do is, even if you do need money, ask people to donate $1 for this litigation, and you'll have $350 million in the US. So there'll be plenty of money to fight this lawsuit. All you have to do is stand around city corners and say, give me $1, we're going to sue President Obama or the US administration. And the same thing happened in every country. And then at the same time, people have to take some action by themselves. Let this process continue. It will politicize the process, and then the politicians are going to have to take a position. Whose side are they on? Let's say even that process doesn't work, because this is the way it has been. They make deals in the Senate and the Congress and the parliaments and so on, and people are sidelined. People don't know. They set up these committees and so on, and GAO or this, that committee, all kinds of things, and the United Nations committees. This is all a ruse. This is a farce. Okay, let's say it'll take a number of years to go through the process, the legal process and the political process. The third option is that people should say, we want to grow our own food. And here's how we want to grow. We want to grow in our own private gardens, community gardens, in churches, in temples, religious places, free land, municipal lands, and schoolyards. And we want our children to be educated our way, the PTAs, and everybody gets involved. We want our children to be taught food production in schoolyards. It should be a compulsory course, part of the curriculum. All education, which is all theoretical right now, and children get bored and leave school and so on, it should be all around growing food from age 5 to 18. Everything they learn, whether it's counting, whether it's sprouting, whether it's harvesting, whether it's eating, whether it's solar system, greenhouses, whatever, it should all be taught in practical terms in schoolyards. Schoolyards should become the living laboratory. And then there should be extension of that. There should be community gardens. And in the schools, same places, municipalities, green municipalities, they're collecting all this green waste. They're making compost that can be delivered there. It will be a community effort to take charge of their own food supply. A lot of that is beginning to happen. But I am saying move it to the local school board and municipal politics. Detroit is one city where this experiment is being tried, because this is a city which has been destroyed because of corruption in the automotive industries and the banks and so on. So one man took charge of one school, turned into a farm school, and the mayor said, let's turn the others, because people had nothing else to eat. They lost their homes. Where were they going to go? So they're saying, let's do something on our side. Well, why not Chicago? Why not New York? Why not New Jersey? Why not Toronto? Why not Ottawa, Calgary, Delhi, Bombay? In the suburbs of all these, even urban centers, there is land, there are schools, and that can be utilized for food production. Already there's too much food in the world, but this will be healthy food. It'll improve people's health. Children will be off the streets. Children will be taken care of in schools. Right now, parents are always afraid, criminals luring them away and so on. This will be, grandparents will be there. Everybody will be there. This is the Gandhian approach to education, which unfortunately the man got killed too soon. And the ideas that I'm exploring are stolen from him. I'm saying this should be implemented. I've traveled all over the world in the last couple of years, Australia, New Zealand, India, the United States, Canada, everywhere, giving lectures, but it's not having an effect. But I'm not, even though now I'm 76 years of age, I still have a lot of energy. I'm not one who gives up. So this summer, for a change, for the first time in my life, I had the whole summer free to myself. I didn't have to go to work. I didn't have to go to court fighting my dismissal. So I took charge of my own land and my 5 grandchildren. I'm using recycled materials because everybody talks about raised gardens. I got a lot of windows in my house changed last year. And they said, what do we do with these windows? Take them away. I said, you take away the glass, leave me the frames. These are vinyl frames. They've been on the windows for 25 years. Now, some of them were on the ground and they don't rot, nothing happens. So I put them on the ground and I put filter cloth underneath, filled them up with garden soil, and I planted my garden. And I brought my 5 grandchildren, handed over my little tractor, and they're all working with me for the whole summer. Now, I've started to talk about it outside. The Canadian Organic Growers Association had been approaching me to go and give a talk. I said, no, I'm tired of giving talks. You come to me. I want your help. So they're coming to see me in a week, and I want to show them my garden because they are dedicated to helping people grow organic food. So I want to show them what I've done. I sit on a piece of land. It's about 5 or 6 acres, which only was grass. Instead of cutting grass, I'm turning that into a garden. So I'm saying I could feed a lot of people. Just come and help me. And so they're going to come and help me do this. Once I have this, it's an experimental garden that I've set up in a very scientific way. And my grandchildren working with me, and I want to turn this into a school project and a demonstration project. So then I've already talked to some local politicians who are willing and say, okay, can we then take it to our local municipality and the school board, and can we work on this process? And in India, I'm telling the NGOs to hold a national or international conference for education reform and curriculum reform, because it's important why India is critical in this. Many US, Canadian, and Australian and British universities have made a deal with India to open branches in India from Harvard, McGill, big Ivy League universities in India, because it's too expensive to run those universities here. So they want to do that in India. But then they say there has to be, there's a condition. And that condition is that India's high school graduates must all be given a standard curriculum. And so the government of India has brought in a new Education Act, 150 years later. The last Education Act was passed during the British time in 1835. And now the Indian government is saying they're going to revise that. And for pre-university students, there should be a standardized curriculum of English, math, and science. And I'm saying add one more subject, that we want to add 2 elementary schools, that all the freehold land in villages in the care of village councils and schools should grow food attached to the schools, and children should be critical part of it. And so utilize that workforce without calling it labor. It's not child labor. It's part of their education. They will grow up to be healthy children. They will get free food. They will never go hungry, and they will be able to sell excess. If we start doing this, food can be taken out of the economic equation the world over. Once food is taken out of the economic equation, no multinational corporation can exist for more than a year, because they are responsible to their investors. If they don't make money, they die. And that's what I think will happen. They will die a natural death. If people do not buy their products, grow their own food, there'll be no Monsanto, there'll be no Bayer, not for food production, not for food production. And that, I think, these are very simple solutions. Adopt the 5 pillars of food safety, grow your own, grow it in schools, grow and make the governments and corporations irrelevant. These are our human rights. These are our constitutional rights. If the governments want to bring in military, well, I'll be the first one to line up to go to jail.
All right, well, we're approaching the end of our time here, but it sounds like a great strategy. And for those of our listeners and viewers who want to learn more, they can obtain your book. And can you mention that? We'll put a link on the site, but what's the name of your book again?
Corrupt to the Core, Memoirs of a Health Canada Whistleblower.
Okay, so they can get that book, and it's available on Amazon. And we'll put a link to it.
I'll show it on camera.
Sure.
I'll show it on camera.
Great.
It's available on Amazon.com.
Sure, and that will have most of the information that you reviewed here in more detail. So it's a great system. I thank you for your time, to describe a process that really provides a solution to some of the pervasive and really challenging issues that affect all of us and in the future generations in a very profound way. So I appreciate that.
I
And
can I make a request, Joe?
sure.
Send this to White House, to Obamacare. I think, and Fareed Zakaria and Dr. Sanjay Gupta and all of these people on CNN should, uh, um, these journalists, they should be taking advice from your journalism.
Well, that's what we hope to do, but the strategy is to really educate the masses so that they're inspired and really make a change. And we did do that last year with the swine flu, and this is probably a bit more of a challenge because it's not in the media all the time, and it's a little more subtle and deceptive and manipulative, and really requires a broader-based educational intervention. So we can start the process. I think it's a good strategy, and really thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on.